Hi everybody. Today's video lecture is focusing on social media and social work ethics. I'm actually expanded it to really include technology in social media because there's aspects of this topic that are important to note that don't specifically reference social media. So we're going to kind of include all of that topic today. So the recorder thing that I do only allows me to record for 15 minutes. I'm really going to try to make it through this slideshow in 15 minutes, but it might end up being part 1 and part 2. So the history behind all of this, as we know, social media and technology has not been around forever. And so the Code of Ethics was established far before we had a strong technology presence. Not only in social work, but in the world in general. And so as technology began to advance, there was a need to explore and incorporate what that looked like for social work and in the field. And so then in 2015, a task force was created. So it was the ASWB, the Associated Board of Social Work, NSAW, CSWE, which is the Council of Social Work Education. All of these social work bodies with this massive task force came to really explore like what is going on, what is technology, how are we using it, how can we use it to our advantage, and how can we also protect our clients and our practitioners at the same time. And so in 2017, they submitted new standards, and this got adapted into the updated Code of Ethics that we currently use now. And I actually included 19 different standards related to technology. Later on in the online module, they talk about there's like a learning activity related to some of these new standards, but in the next slide, I'm just going to kind of summarize a little bit of what they started to do. So, again, it expanded more than just social media because technology kind of encompasses many pieces and facets of social work practice. And so some of the new standards include making sure that as part of our informed consent, we were letting clients know what the policies are concerning the use of technology for any part of service delivery and making sure we obtain that informed consent to be able to use it. So for those who are in your internship, I'm willing to bet the majority of you, the way you take notes for your clients' case files is probably electronically. I don't think many agencies use just paper notes anymore. And so with that, electronic health records, at least that's what we refer to them in like clinical medical settings, there is the potential for security breaches. Anybody can hack into systems. Not everybody. Skilled hackers can get into systems. You might accidentally email somebody wrong information. Transitioning to that electronically actually helps probably the social workers type faster and get their notes done quicker. But it does provide some vulnerabilities for the client. So we have to let them know that that exists, and that's part of their services. A lot of billing is done electronically as well. You don't send paper bills in the mail anymore. Often you hit the insurances up through different types of electronic payments and submissions. And so again, there's a vulnerability anytime you send something digitally. So good practice is incorporating that into informed consent and making sure that clients know the policies and that your agencies have a policy. Assessing the client's accessibility for technology. Again, so this is kind of that double-edged sword that using technology to provide services can reach more clients, but it also can highlight disparities between those who have the ability to provide technology for their household or even to understand technology versus those who are very savvy in it and can have great access to it. So although this is not social work related, if we think about COVID and how all schools transitioned, I guess it could be kind of social worky. But anyways, that schools transitioned into online learning, not every household has access to internet. I think in my mind, I would assume that they do because we're just so ingrained in using the internet and technology. But it kind of gave this unequal playing field because you'd have students who could just log onto computers, and then those who had to go find a hotspot somewhere or have school provide a hotspot that didn't consistently work. So we want to make sure that the clients do have ability to access the technology available in ways that doesn't exploit or show the disparities. And so if there are a disparity, if the client doesn't have access to it, how are we advocating for them? There's a really cool initiative happening in Grand Rapids where there's outdoor hotspots. So like different parks in the downtown area are having these like pop-up internet spots. So people can go down there and access the internet for free. It has you still have to have a computer, you still have to have a smartphone, you have those other pieces. But it was kind of a cool initiative that was just announced, I believe, last week. It's kind of a pilot program about these pop-up hotspots. So how I think about right now, a lot of services, when you apply for, like, let's say food stamps or Medicaid, all of that is electronically through DHS. And so clients have to be able to remember their username and password. I can't remember half of my usernames and passwords, especially when they make them be like capital letters, special characters. I get confused. And so if you're living in a state of like chaos, homelessness, how are you expected to remember an electronic password when you're just trying to get your basic needs met? And so having like the hotspots to be able to go have a client go down and fill out an application. I mean, there's a whole host of issues with that. But we need to make sure that we're knowing our clients' like technology literacy as well. If they're able to know what a username is, what a password is, it's part of our responsibility now. The next point is obtaining client consent prior to conducting an internet search. Oh, this is a tricky one because I've been guilty of this, and like after like going over these ethics more intently as an instructor, I realized how many times I breached this one. I loved it to Google clients. It is still very tempting. You can find some really interesting things by doing a Google search. But if it's for your entertainment, that is exploitation to a T. Like these are people's lives, people's personal information. And again, it's on a public platform, so Google. So there's maybe some education you have to do with your clients about not putting it out there. But if you are searching up a client's information on the internet just for fun, that is not okay, as tempting as it is. There is some allotment that if it's an emergency, you need to try to find a phone number for an emergency contact or their address, or you'll see in a couple slides a situation where you may have to Google a client to assess for suicidality. There's some allotment for it, but the rule of thumb is if you are doing it for entertainment purposes, knock it off. That is super disrespectful to client. I've been guilty of it, so there's no judgment coming from this. But in hindsight, I can see how that really like violated the dignity and worth of a person. So that was incorporated in there. These standards are holding social workers accountable for understanding the risks of using technology in service delivery. So we'll go over that in a couple of slides more in detail. We have a responsibility to notify clients if there's a breach in electronic records. So if it would get hacked, if we accidentally sent their information to somebody who wasn't authorized, we are legally obligated to let them know. That aligns with HIPAA, all those different fun protections of information, which are very valid. But we do have a responsibility to let a client know if we ourselves have accidentally breached confidentiality or if we've been hacked. Then there's the fun social media one, really avoiding advising against having dual relationships. That's basically like having friends, like accepting friend requests on different social media platforms, engaging with clients in discussions on social media. That's a really ill-advised thing to do. And then giving caution to social workers and what they publicly post on social media websites, and we'll get into that in a little bit more. So that is kind of summarizing the content of the 19 different standards that were incorporated in 2017. So some ethical dilemmas to consider. This doesn't encompass all of them, but I think it kind of gives a range of different things that we may encounter specific to technology and social media. So this kind of goes along with what I mentioned in the earlier slide about checking social media profiles and doing a Google search. So here is a scenario that might present itself. So you are a social worker in an emergency room, or let's say psych ward, where a newly admitted patient indicates that they have a desire to commit some sort of self-harm and possibly committing suicide. So this is a brand new client. You don't have a well-established biopsychosocial on them. And so you are advised by your coworkers, by your supervisor, to look them up on social media to see if there's any alarming things on Facebook, Twitter, something that might indicate that they have done this in the past, they've attempted in the past, they are at risk, or if it might possibly be a behavior to seek attention to validate how they're feeling. And so utilizing social media and the internet to aid in your assessment of the client. So, is this ethical or unethical? Great question. So, background searching actually runs against the well-established social work practice. That is a really weird, however I wrote that. Essentially, it goes against the social work mandate of respecting clients' privacy and not tracking down information about them that they do not wish to share. So it kind of goes back to that very ingrained principle of clients' privacy, self-worth and dignity, that they can self-disclose what they want. However, the emergency room worker was not necessarily wrong. If a search is conducted to minimize risk and to protect the client, that's a very different situation than if a psychologist and social worker or whoever Googles their clients out of curiosity or for entertainment. Kind of the rule of thumb that if you are going to ever utilize a Google search or social media search, and that your place of employment encourages it in cases where the client's at risk, you really need to include this in your consent for services. So when you're going over everything in the first sessions and acclimating the client to services, just letting them know that there may be a chance in an emergency situation that they would be Google searched. Like, that can be a really awkward conversation, because if I went to a therapist and they're like, well, someday I might Google search you, I'd be like, ooh, really? That's creepy. However, it's good practice to put it into your informed consent so that you do have the ability to do that if you need to. So as I mentioned before, doing Google searches on your client for non-clinical reason is a habit that is not encouraged, and it really is unethical. Again, it's that catch-22 of like, well, if they've posted there and it's public knowledge, then I have the right to see that. If they didn't want me to see that, then they shouldn't have put it up there. But you're going to hear this kind of theme throughout probably this video and other content on the module, that essentially it's up to the social worker to assume responsibility for anything. So because of that power dynamic, we're the provider. We can easily take advantage, intentionally and unintentionally, of a vulnerable client. We kind of have to be aware of the power position that we play, and that we assume responsibility to abide by the code of ethics and not exploit our clients through any of our lurking or Google searches. Because then, like, let's say you found some information during your search. I actually had this. I was trying to track down a client because he'd been missing from our housing program, and one of the rules of housing was you could not be engaging in substance use. So I happened to creep on his social media, on his Facebook, to see if he'd been active, to give indications that he was still alive, or if he was in town. And it was just filled with paraphernalia about his marijuana use. So here I'm at this crossroads where he's telling me he's not using, he's abiding by program rules. Well, now I found all this information. Like, how do you confront a client with information that you like creepily obtained, and it can really break trust. Yep, so we're